Hello everyone. Sorry for the delay on this video, as it was meant to arrive 2 weeks ago, but I decided to make the smart decision of holding the video back for a short period of time. This was because BHVR announced that they were planning on making changes to Krasue over the next 2 hotfix patches, and I wanted to see what would happen. This is because Krasue's balance was, as the hip kids would say, beyond cracked on release, and I knew that it had the potential to influence my perspective on her design, along with other people. As a result, I wanted to wait for her to calm down so I could see her in a more controlled state. Additionally, I wanted to spend a little extra time carefully looking through Krasue's kit and experimenting with it, because unlike Animatronic, who I made a video on before, like this one, his design is a lot more simple to grasp compared to the moving parts that Krasue offers. Lastly, I am just a lazy bum, and I didn't feel like making videos for 2 whole weeks, which really hurts me trying to make content at least once a week, but my laziness won this time around. Hopefully not the next time though. All jokes aside though, I wanted to mostly see how Behavior would handle Krasue's balance with the hotfix patches, and I am very glad that I did wait on the matter, because what we did get was interesting. Before getting into this video, I believe I should state what the whole purpose of this video is about, as I learned from my mistakes on the animatronic video, and I am going to be much more transparent here. The goal I am trying to reach with this series is to discuss the core design of the Krasue, what I believe are great elements, what Behavior could improve upon, and honestly just some cool details that I discovered that make her pretty neat. Additionally, it's important for me to note that I am not talking about balance here. Balance for any character is a very important element, and it can influence the design of the character. But the whole point of this video is to talk about her core design, and whether it will be healthy throughout the test of time for Dead by Daylight. To provide a great example of what I am talking about, let's use 2 killers where one was harmed by balance, while another was harmed because of design. Wesker is a great example of a killer whose design is well loved, and has been mostly problem-free, with the exception of his infection promoting hypertunnel strategies. The issue with Wesker at that time was instead because of the balance of his infection, allowing the tunnel strategy to manifest, and due to how problematic it was, along with how often this creature appeared in games at the time, it clouded players' judgment on what was necessary to handle the issue. In comparison, a killer whose design really fell apart was Skull Merchant, specifically Skull Merchant 1.0. This is because her drones allowed for extreme levels of 3-gen defense. This was a design that was impossible to fix through balancing, as any changes to promote chase play would instead promote the gen defense element, and any nerfs would instead harm her players who weren't being malicious. It would take a whole rework that pushed more towards trap and anti-loop play rather than tracking to resolve the problem, and even still, most players just view her as a 3-gen killer. And to this day, Skull Merchant players receive nothing but negative stigma. This is something I never want to see anyone face, as people just want to play their characters and have fun, but it is also up to Behavior to make sure the characters' designs have enough to keep them in check, and not push towards disruptive playstyles or strategies. That being said, I will bring up potential changes Behavior can make when helping Krasue to support healthier play, as there are problematic elements that have manifested over time. Additionally, I'll be doing something a little new with this type of video, where I will be highlighting the good and bad elements on the screen of each part of the killer's design when talking about them. This is because I recognize that my discussion on animatronics sounded a little more negative than I wanted it to, when that was not my intended goal. This change will be a great stepping stone to show off what I believe makes the new characters interesting, along with highlighting core issues that I believe exists in the character's design. Lastly, before getting into the meat and bones of the video, pun intended, the perspective I am using for Krasue's design is from a solo queue space. This is because swift play is a very different beast compared to the average solo queue game, where we have a Sable with no mither spam vaulting a pallet, Jill who's AFK making coffee, and a Nia who is trying to only go for flashlight saves. Additionally, solo queue is the largest group of Survivor players, and as a result it would feel odd to make a video talking about a sphere of the game that not everyone truly utilizes, especially as not everyone is a comp swift. With all of this said and done, let's finally get into the discussion of the Krasue and her design. To quickly summarize what sort of killer the Krasue is, she is a chase-focused killer, one who utilizes two different forms to perform this act, these being body and head forms. I believe the best way to explain Krasue's kit is through explaining her abilities first, before talking about health. So, let's start with the simplest of the two, that being the body form, as this form is what I believe allows her to stay under check with healthy design. The body form follows with the typical killer traits of 115 move speed, 32 meter to air radius, and the ability she holds while in body form is called Regurgitate. The Krasue spits out a fast projectile that upon landing on a survivor or wall, splinters into several different projectiles. Any survivor who is hit by this leeching gland is fully infected with an ailment known as Leeched 1, and after enough time passes, that infection builds up into Leeched 2, injuring the survivor and inflicting the broken status effect. Now, as you are listening and potentially reading this, you may start to draw similarities to Plague, as she too breaks survivors when fully infecting them. But there is a very big difference between the two. Plague's core focus is all about building up that infection, meaning she has several tools at her disposal to increase that infection rate, whether it be through add-ons, her continuing to land puke in a continuous stream, or the survivors performing actions to speed up the full infection. Krasue is different, as this is not her core focus, and as a result she barely has anything to speed up the infection. Spamming the leeching gland on survivors does not build up the infection rate, nor does the survivors performing any actions. Even her add-on selection does not make much use of the infection playstyle. Interestingly enough, Krasue cannot even infect survivors while they are on the floor or on hook, which is a common tactic that Plague does to start her infection. But the reason for Krasue is a very simple one, and we will get to that one very soon. Going back to the status ailment, it works on a fixed timer, and Leech 2 realistically won't be met in most games, as the form of removal for this infection is very easy to find. Around the map you will find glowing fungi that you can consume while moving at a slower pace, and after consuming the fungi, the leeching status ailment will begin to decay slowly over time. The timer is dependent on how far you have progressed with the infection, but it's also important to note that Krasue can reset that infection by dealing a damage state in any way, or by simply reinfecting with Regurgitate. Now with all of this talk about the infection, let's talk about why it's important for Krasue to infect survivors to begin with, and that is because of her second form, the head form. With a quick transition, Krasue enters a third-person camera with several new bells and whistles. While in the head form, Krasue works with a 120% move speed, a 40 meter tear radius, and is unable to fetch bloodlust or break pallets. Additionally, Krasue gains the ability to vault pallets and windows, and don't worry, we will talk about that feature when we talk about health. In head form, Krasue is unable to use basic attacks. Instead, she only works with an M2 attack called Intestinal Whip, where she lunges forward, and if the survivor is infected with at least Leech 1, they will take damage. Else they will gain a third of the infection bar. Additionally, the controls of the Intestinal Whip are using a fixed turn rate and wind-up, similar to how Xenomorph's tail functions in a way, but Krasue herself is the tail, but in third person. Krasue also has another ability while in head form, that being a fast movement tool called Headlong Flight, allowing her to quite literally slither around the floor at fast speeds. As long as she has over a quarter of charges remaining for Headlong Flight, she can enter first person and slide along the floor at a fast pace, and she can also vault during this time too, but it will end Headlong Flight upon doing so. Lastly, with head form, she can still pick survivors up, and she will deal a normal damage state when carrying them, and her transition from head to body does take longer and makes her incredibly slow when doing so. Overall, there are several elements about Krasue's kit that I absolutely love, but compared to animatronic where I could talk about the good and bad when discussing each part of his kit, Krasue is a lot more difficult. This is because everything in her kit blends together. You need to use her body form to infect survivors to unlock the power of head form, but it is important to note that head form is not just a win button, at least not anymore. There are several situations where the head form cannot save you, and as a result, you will need to know when to swap back to the body form to destroy a pallet, or reinfect targets. Additionally, Krasue's kit has a lot of damage control elements in place to prevent her going overboard, especially now after the changes she received through the hotfix patches. As a result, it was important for me to provide a quick summary of her kit first, as now I can go more in depth to reveal what makes Krasue's kit so interesting, but also highlight important points on what makes her quite problematic. Let's of course start with her body form, as I believe that the balance is, for the most part, very well done. The logic behind the body form is that this is Krasue's weakest state, as it does not have anything specific to it that allows her to overpower the survivors. It's all basic stats, and Regurgitate by itself does not do much, especially as you cannot build it up like with Plague's Infection. Instead, the logic is that you want to apply Leeched with body form to unlock the potential of her strongest state of head form, and for survivors you want to keep her in body form for as long as possible. As a result, Behavior introduced some interesting elements to Regurgitate to allow unique ways to apply Leeched, and I find that these unique ways are rather skill expressive. Outside of its ricochet effect on walls, one unique thing I discovered is that it splinters around generators whenever Regurgitate touches any part of it, similar to if you hit a survivor. A great way for me to show this off is with this clip here, where the Claudette is hiding behind the generator and I am too far away to directly hit or hit any nearby wall. Instead, because I know of how Regurgitate works on a generator, I shoot the side of it, causing me to infect her. It's these little touches that make me enjoy Krasue so much, as it's elements like this that makes Regurgitate feel like such a fun ability, although it realistically does not do much compared to other ranged attacks. That being said, there was one really big problem with Regurgitate that Behavior did resolve in the recent hotfix patch, and that was her cooldown between Regurgitate and going for a basic attack. Before the patch, Krasue had to wait only 1 second, which was extremely odd, as every other killer in the game with a ranged ability of some sort has a 2-second cooldown. Outside of the obvious misfits like with Huntress and Animatronic, even killers like Artist Unknown had the extended buffer before being allowed to basic attack. This is built into the game to give survivors a chance to make distance, along with reducing the potential of the killer being allowed to double tap survivors. This clip is a great example of why this buffer needs to be here. After infecting and fetching an injury almost instantly, I enter body form and remove all forms of distance the survivor made just with headlong flight. Do you see the problem here? I am playing a killer who already has a tool to remove the distance made by a survivor, while at the same time prepping myself almost instantly for my strongest form, all within 1 second. This was an extremely large issue for Krasue's health, because even if Krasue missed the infection, she could damage a survivor within 1 second, which felt incredibly cheap. As I say, this behavior have resolved the problem, which you can see here, as I am spamming the attack button in this example, and there is a very large difference in time compared to before. It's realistically a small change, but it does wonders to help make Krasue feel more fair to face. So great work there, Behavior. That's one good thing you've done so far this last few months. Moving on, let's talk about the Leeching Gland, as Behavior too have helped to reduce one of its biggest problems recently as well. Before talking about these problems though, let's talk about the logic behind using the glowing fungi, as it is similar in vein to using an EMP against Singularity. You want to use the item to remove the status effect that unlocks the killer's strongest state. That being said, Behavior have learned a lot from Singularity's EMPs, and we see an interesting approach here. Similar to Singularity, if you pick up the glowing fungus and drop it, it will vanish, but unlike Singularity's EMP, which disappears instantly, you are given a few seconds before it breaks. This allows survivors to pick up glowing fungi and deliver them to teammates to consume, which I greatly appreciate, as it helps promote selfless play for a mostly selfish item, which is always welcome in Dead by Daylight. That being said, one of the biggest worries Behavior had with Singularity's design long ago was one survivor becoming the designated EMP farmer and just crafting a whole supply for their team to use, and as a result they introduced the self-destruct feature to it. Krasue's design understands this potential problem too, and to prevent survivors turning into mushroom farmers, it is Krasue herself who creates the fungi for survivors when she enters head form from her body. This does raise an issue in the sense of placement, however, as Krasue can manipulate where the fungi spawn by her choosing where to transform, along with behavior constantly reducing the maximum fungi count. This raised a potential strategy where Krasue could have all survivors infected, while the only available fungi were in one spot that she decided to set up. But behavior have removed this issue through one change that was not even meant for this problem. If you have been playing Dead by Daylight for the last 2 weeks, then you would know by now that Krasue's biggest annoyance was her tunnel potential. When Krasue was being tested on the PTB, we had an anti-tunnel and anti-slug system in the works, and as a result we did not get to see how malicious Krasue could be, as the game would shotgun her the moment she tried it. As that system was held back, we have now gotten to see how cruel Krasue can be to face, and good gravy was she evil. This is because of how Leeched worked, as it only could be removed through the glowing fungus. But even still, survivors had to wait for the cleansing effect to finish. Returning to comparisons, Singularity is once again a great example of showing how to counter aggressive tunneling as a chase-focused killer. Singularity's Slipstream is a very powerful tool, one that many of us already know about, as he can steamroll through any tile and can delete any distance the survivor makes. That being said, his tunnel capabilities are limited by 2 parts. The first is that when a survivor is hooked, the slipstream is removed from their body, and the second has to do with the biopod. When Singularity is attempting to slipstream a survivor near a hooked target or attempting to slipstream the unhooked or unhooking survivor, the biopod takes a very long time to do so. This is Behavior's form of damage control on Singularity's capabilities to tunnel, as Behavior know how strong he can be, and as a result provide tools to prevent the tunnel out. It does not fully remove it, but it does at least reduce its potential dramatically. Krasue was the exact opposite of this, as the survivor was already infected the moment they got unhooked, and Krasue could use that mobility of headlong flight to return to the hook at almost any moment. Luckily, Behavior recently updated Leeched to now remove whenever a survivor is hooked, and I am honestly glad about that change. It is a very simple change that puts a good doorstop in this playstyle, but it also is a change that does not do all that much in the long term. Krasue can still actively tunnel. The only difference now is that she has to delay her lethality by a few seconds to reinfect. But this is still a good time sink that I find welcome compared to before. Now we move on to the glowing fungi, and I will admit that for the most part, I have no problem with glowing fungi having a decay for cleansing, as I believe it has the potential to be really healthy. Adding a timer for Krasue to secure a damage state or else she is forced into her weaker form is honestly a really interesting and healthy element when done properly. Unfortunately, how it has been implemented is rather flimsy. Leeched can be reset by almost anything, and the time it takes to cleanse is very long, especially compared to how easy it is to reinfect as Krasue. This ends up making the glowing fungi, the thing that is meant to counter her, feel as useful as a bucket of water for a forest fire. It may do something, but not really resolve the big problem. One change that I've seen making the rounds is to make the glowing fungi completely remove the leeched effects instantly, and although I don't hate it, it's a change I wouldn't recommend. The problem with making strict counters like these is they end up feeling boring for both use and for playing against. A great example is once again Singularity, as when he released on the PTB, many players absolutely hated facing the EMP, as farming it was quick and it prevented Singularity from doing anything. When Behavior went to nerfing the EMP, it is now a lot harder to fetch, and from a survivor's perspective, it is not very interactive poking a box to 3D print you a glowing stick. A more interesting counter tool done right is Xenomorph's flame turrets, because despite my visceral hatred for that character, I will admit that the flame turrets are really interesting. When using the flame turrets, survivors can fetch information on where to run for protection and whether Xenomorph is close by in their tunnel. On the killer side, they can break it quickly or simply go for a tail whip on a survivor while working on a short timer before being burned out of crawler mode. It's all interesting play for both sides, if not balanced a little awkwardly, and I believe Krasue's fungi can share in this philosophy, at least in the design space. The change I would recommend for glowing fungi would be that Krasue should only be allowed to refresh the leached status effect through regurgitate. And in the case of intestinal whip, it should still deal damage during the decay, but it should not restart leached. Something many survivors have been trying to do to disrupt Krasue is by using the fungus while in chase, and attempting to live long enough for the timer to fully work, and to a degree this can be beneficial. A great example is in this clip where I am facing Michaela, and because of smart play from her, and poor decision making from me, she cleanses before I can damage her. This is a sad event, but in truth it's an event that feels well justified. The Michaela deserves to feel rewarded for playing smart here, and I deserve to be punished for making too many mistakes. Unfortunately, this is not the typical event for Krasue when facing a cleansing survivor. Instead, it is very easy to reinfect and break the cleanse. As a result, the use of the glowing fungus is not all that clear, as Krasue can infect the survivor extremely easily, and the counterplay against it requires too much to go in your favor to function. As a result, the use of the glowing fungus is not all that clear, as Krasue can reinfect the survivor extremely easily, and the counterplay against it is way too difficult for survivors to execute. This proposed system change does a much better job at keeping Krasue under control for the survivors, while not taking too much away from her head form strengths. This is because survivors will now place Krasue on a timer for the chase, and if Krasue cannot secure damage during this time, she will be severely punished to re-enter body form to infect, but as I say this, Krasue can still work against this timer to fetch it down. This change punishes bad Krasue players, while rewarding good Krasue players who can think fast in chases, and makes chases between Krasue and the survivors more engaging for both sides. Moving over to her head form, let's start with her intestinal whip. But before talking about the issues, let's talk about the good, as there are some really smart decisions here that I truly want to highlight. When Behavior revealed that Krasue was capable of vaulting pallets and windows, I already knew people were going to stress about the strength of this killer. Pallet vaulting has always been a massive balance headache to deal with, and that is because, for the most part, the balance of previous killers have been either extremely strict or poorly handled. That being said, I believe this is the rare instance where the balance is actually somewhat good. To a degree. What makes killers like Chucky and Ghoul absolute menaces to face was the fact that they could fetch basic attacks after performing the vault. A great example is with Chucky, as he used to be paired with Hubris and Enduring, allowing him to fetch a free one-shot while having the ability to scamper under the pallet almost instantly after getting stunned. Ghoul has a similar problem, as he has access to almost any perk in the game with him using basic attacks, and the fact he slowed survivors until he finished a power vault made catching up to them extremely easy. Krasue is different, as she cannot use basic attacks while in the head form. Instead, she can only deal damage through intestinal whip. On the PTB, this allowed survivors to outplay her, as her turn rate was extremely tight, and her windup was predictable enough for survivors to read, and the fact she could not slide on obstruction meant she struggled on short round tiles, similar to Demogorgon with a shred. This allowed for some healthy counterplay on the survivor end, as it gave them enough chances to dodge the intestinal whip, while allowing survivors to utilize smaller tiles to force Krasue into her body form to break the pallet. Unfortunately, this logic ended up vanishing at first when she entered live servers, as Behavior increased the turn rate, reduced the windup, and added a feature to allow Intestinal Whip to slide on terrain for a short time. This now means that Krasue can outplay the tiles that she struggled with, as she can now literally hug tech them, and can turn enough to fetch a damage state on a dodging target. Additionally, that windup was cut in half from the PTB, making dodging Intestinal Whip even more difficult to do. With me saying this, it does appear that Behavior have realized the problems these changes caused, as the last two hotfix changes did a good number of retweaking to bring back Krasue's weaknesses on certain tiles. In hotfix 9.2.1, they increased the time to vault pallets and windows while reducing the time to slide on terrain. In hotfix 9.2.2, They increased the windup to be almost the same as the PTB, and funnily enough reduced the damage range when swinging through pallets and windows. That last change in particular is great, as Krasue could land some... let's call them interesting hits, to be family friendly here. Regardless though, these are all wonderful changes for Krasue that push in the right direction, as now she will become more fair feeling on tiles she's meant to excel on, while also making the tiles she's meant to be weak on feel more powerful. That being said, although the changes are good, they are not perfect, and behavior could do a little more, such as reducing that turn rate. One of my personal favorite parts about Krasue on the PTB was the sheer fact that survivors could outplay Krasue through dodging her attacks, but that increase to her turn rate makes this almost impossible. I do think it was a necessary change, especially to make her feel nicer to play, but it could be reduced by a hair to help bring dodging back as a skillful form of counterplay. Now we finish with Headlong Flight, and for the most part behavior have done a good job on balancing it from its PTB design. Back on the PTB, Headlong Flight allowed Krasue to slide under survivors, making it possible for Krasue to body block extremely easily. The live release instead added collision to Krasue when using the form, meaning not only does Krasue need to put in more effort to fetch a body block, but it also means teammates can body block Krasue in Headlong Flight. This has overall been a wonderful change for healthy play, as it gives uninfected survivors the chance to deny her mobility, while also making body blocking from Krasue's side require more skill. That being said, there is one big problem with Headlong Flight, and that is how useful it is for returning to tunnel players out. You see, Krasue's mobility is rather unique, as unlike other mobility tools that need to be fully charged, Krasue can use Headlong Flight at almost any point, as long as it's over 25% charges. As a result, you have almost free use of utilizing Headlong Flight at any given moment. In fact, you can use it to return to a hooked target, to traverse the map, find a survivor, bake a pie, and during that entire time you still have just enough charges to use Headlong Flight and chase. Although a very versatile mobility tool, it ends up feeling annoying to face on the survivor side, as they are never able to have a moment to breathe. A great example to compare Headlong Flight to would be Spirit, as you can move at fast speeds with low visibility, while also utilizing it for a plethora of reasons. The only difference is that Spirit has to wait until her phase is fully charged before being allowed to move, while Krasue can go at almost any point. As for what behavior can do to help resolve this issue while maintaining the nice elements of Headlong Flight, behavior don't have to do all that much. Increasing the threshold is by far the simplest and easiest answer. What is even funnier is that we have an add-on that does just that. I'll talk more about Frame Newspaper once I get into the add-on segment of the video, but one thing I really appreciate with it is that it makes Headlong Flight unable to be activated unless you have over half of the power meter. This is an absolutely wonderful system that reduces the freedom of Headlong Flight and as a result, gives survivors a window to loop her without her insane mobility, along with restricting her potential to use Headlong Flight when returning to chase unhooked targets. It's a simple change, not much else I can say other than I believe it would be a great middle ground to keep her mobility's freedom while giving enough time for survivors to make distance and disrupt his potential to reward tunnel play. Realistically, Krasue does not need that many changes to her base design, especially after the recent hotfix patches, as they help to resolve many of her most obnoxious problems that appeared after her release. I do overall believe behavior went in an incredibly smart direction with updating Krasue, as being more surgical in nature is a necessary act for a killer like her, where one change could influence 30 other parts outside of what you actually wanted to fix. That being said, Krasue does still have a few hiccups left over in her design, and as a result I felt it was fair to bring them up and show off some potential changes to help bring them more in line for healthier forms of play. Krasue is definitely not perfect yet, but I do believe behavior are going in a very good direction. I believe that she has the potential to become a fan favorite killer to both play as and against if they do keep going in this smart direction. We now move on to Krasue's add-ons, and this is where things become interesting. Whenever behavior design add-ons for stronger killers, they normally go with a straightforward approach and keep away from promoting diverse playstyles. This is done mostly to prevent situations where these strong killers could weaponize the add-ons to remove counterplay on the survivor end, and a great example of this is of course with the Ghoul. We all know of the infamous combo of Yomori's Mask and Centipede, as these add-ons are virtually just as strong as perks with their balance. As a result, it gives Ghoul free reign to run any perk he so desires, with having two already great add-ons to supplement any weaknesses his builds would normally carry. Krasue on the other hand does something unique, as she does have a variety of add-ons that promote diverse forms of play. She has the simple add-ons that are stat boosters, of course just like any other killer, but she also has some add-ons that lean into such weird gimmick territory that it completely alters how you normally want to play her, yet do so in an interesting and healthy way. To start her add-on list off, let's of course talk about the browns, as 3 of them are very easy to discuss. The Sticky Lozenge provides a visual preview of the initial impact of the leeching gland, an add-on that is very common with projectile killers of any kind, and this is weirdly the nicest one visually. It's not distracting like Twin's cat figurine, but it's also not as detailed as animatronics Help Wanted add. It's a good blend of clear enough of where it will go, but not distracting enough that new players will find good use from it. The Luckless Mouse is a simple stat booster, increasing the Headlong Flight's charges by a small amount. Not amazing, but still a decently solid choice, as it gives you longer duration to use Headlong Flight, and as we continue, you may notice many of her best add-ons tend to promote that part of her power. The Broken Tiara applies Oblivious to survivors affected by the glowing fungus, and it's okay. Although survivors will be using the glowing fungus to remove your infection, the moment you refresh the infection or injure them, the effects of Broken Tiara ends. Don't get me wrong, it can still be useful, especially when built around, but even still, there are better options through perks, especially now that hooked survivors lose Leeched, making the add-on lose some of its potential value. The last add-on is the First Libretto, and this one is rather unique. When hooking a leeched survivor, your consumption rate of Headlong Flight charges are reduced for a short time. I actually really like the design here for First Libretto, as it rewards your downs with a potential snowball to traverse the map and enter fast chases with charges remaining for Headlong Flight. I am honestly surprised to see this as a brown add-on, especially for how beneficial charge consumption can be for Headlong Flight. It could be a green with how good it truly is. Speaking about the green rarity, we have Wriggling Parasite, which increases the passive growth rate for Leeched by a small amount. It's a simple stat booster for something that you really don't care that much about as Krasue. Don't get me wrong, it's nice that behavior provided something for people trying to fetch unique gameplay through infections, as we will see with several other add-ons, but it's a very plain add-on that I suspect can be a balanced nightmare if handled poorly. Then again, it does reward some really funny hits, like in this example here.
Exodia! Obliterate!
Chunkamalai is a slightly better and interesting option in comparison, as it increases the glowing fungi's cleansing rate depending on the number of infected survivors. Another add-on that promotes Krasue's snowball potential, and one that is more healthier in concept to Wriggling Parasite. It's not super strong, but it does have its uses, especially with one of the visceral add-ons, and I admire it for that at the very least. Pig's Eye reveals the auras of survivors who eat a fungus when over a certain range, and I do like the balance here. It recognizes that Krasue can catch survivors at Mach 10, so it limits its minimum range to reduce potential negative gameplay, but at the same time, it gives survivors a chance to outplay its value. If survivors believe they are facing Pig's Eye, then they can purposely go closer towards Krasue to cleanse, which is a nice risk versus reward element that I admire. Defective Metronome is similar to Broken Tiara in activation, where survivors affected by glowing fungi will now gain exhaustion. Weirdly enough, I actually like Broken Tiara more than Defective Metronome, but only by a little bit. The issue with this add-on is that Krasue does not care about exhaustion perks like other chase-focused killers, as she can be fast enough to remove the distance made by survivors with any exhaustion perk. Although a great choice for any other killer, It falls apart for Krasue as she does not have any use for it outside of some really niche situations. Lastly, for the greens, we have the crumpled music sheet, and this one is stupidly busted. Survivors hit by a leeching gland grant Krasue 12 charges for headlong flight. You may notice that this is the first and only time I actually listed a number for Krasue and her add-ons, and that is because I want to document this number, as Krasue's base charges for headlong flight is 12 as well. Long story short, you can use headlong flight to traverse the whole map, do some sightseeing while you're at it, and when you do find a survivor and infect them, you are now getting all of the charges of headlong flight back. Like, good gravy, this is like giving Nurse a Brown add-on that refunds her a blink charge if she hits a survivor after blinking. The strength of this add-on is absolutely criminal, as not only do you bring back all of your charges for chasing a fresh target, but you also store in your back pocket mobility to return to the hooked survivor. With them now being cleansed on getting hooked too, you can completely refresh your charges for headlong flight once again, to help boost your head form even further for the tunnel out. What is even funnier is that this is a green add-on, where in comparison we had the rat in the brown category that gave you 2 charges. Where did the logic change where a rat only gives you 2 charges while a crumpled piece of paper is giving your power back completely? Is it Mozart's missing masterpiece?
Play Peter Griffin.
Ah, now that is a challenge.
Go ahead, mock me. But it wasn't Stewie who was laughing at me. It was God!
I think I made myself clear that this thing is insanely strong and insanely problematic, and either deserves a nerf or a restriction, which I will talk about after discussing all the add-ons. Moving over to the blue rarities, let's start with one of my personal favorite add-ons of the bunch, that being the theater binoculars. Realistically, the add-on is not that great, but at the same time it has the potential to be good, as it reveals survivors' auras within a certain range after hitting a non-infected survivor with Intestinal Whip. I can see where the value of this add-on can come into play, as it helps to reduce the power of a non-infected survivor tanking a hit by giving you info on where your infected survivor is running off to. I actually think this add-on can see play, and it deserves to see play, especially as it's a very unique and fairly healthy add-on design. Frame Newspaper 2 is an add-on that I find to be fantastic, as it slightly increases the charges and recharge rate of headlong flight, but comes at the cost that it now needs to be over 50% charges to activate. The restriction is one that, as I said, should be added into Krasue's base design, as it would help reduce her tunnel potential and reward her for shorter uses of the mobility. Outside of that healthy element for the add-on, it's a great stat booster. It's no wonder behavior made it partially base kit. Speaking about stat boosters, the Dulled Knife is another fun choice for Krasue, as it reduces the charge consumption of headlong flight, but in exchange it gives survivors haste and the elusive status effect after eating a fungus for a short time. It's honestly the weakest blue add-on balance-wise, as it gives survivors a ton of features on the glowing fungi, but that reduced consumption rate may actually be worth it. The last 2 add-ons play around an endgame build, and you honestly cannot help but love them for that. Spattered Handkerchief makes all survivors infected with Leeched 1, and removes glowing fungi and prevents your body from spawning more fungi when the last generator is powered. Janjira's Hand adds charges and reduces the recharge rate when a gen is completed for a short time, and when the last generator is powered, Headlong Flight is fully charged up and the recharge rate is reduced for the remainder of the trial. Honestly, both add-ons play nicely with supporting endgame builds, as they push Krasue's power all into the endgame with reducing survivors' resources and enhancing Krasue's Headlong Flight recharge. They are not exceptional, but they are indeed an absolute treat when they go off, especially when you lean very heavily into the endgame build path that it's pushing you towards. I think the blues are the only add-ons so far where there haven't been any big problems design-wise, as they all have their own unique approaches and feel healthy with good enough restrictions. It's honestly pretty great. Something Crumpled Music Sheet should take a page or two from. Sadly, we do not follow with that philosophy with the purple add-ons, as we begin to see a return to unhealthy gameplay strategies or simply poor handling of their concepts. Lorenza's Remains applies blindness when survivors are in Leech 1, along with a small hinder when they're in Leech 2. It's a very basic add-on effect-wise, but it's still a very strong effect, especially in solo queue where information of any sort is necessary to function. Removing information through blindness allows Krasue to now perform slugging styles of gameplay, similar to Singularity with cremated remains. Although it may not be the intended goal, it does very little to remove that potential. Krasue herself is already a very scary killer with her chase potential, so a slugging strategy is not out of the window as we can see with killers like Twins and Singularity, and with this add-on it is now much easier to perform. Additionally, that hinder is realistically never going to be met, meaning this add-on is only being run for the blindness, with a potential hinder if you are facing a Sable gang. Next we have the Queen Scepter, which causes survivors hit by Intestinal Whip to shoot out leeching gland splinters, similar to if you directly hit them with Regurgitate. It's honestly a pretty cute add-on that pushes the thematic of blood and gore in a more comedic sense, as you're shooting more out of your noodle legs, but it's also one that has the potential to remove the best form of counterplay for survivors when facing Krasue, that being to body block. If a survivor were to try and protect their teammates while they are cleansing, well, Queen Scepter reapplies the leeched one, and any non-infected survivor now have the potential of getting infected themselves when too close. This add-on was even worse to face back when survivors had to cleanse after getting unhooked, as now their progress was getting reset by their teammates trying to play how behavior wanted them to. I believe that Queen Scepter has the potential to be a healthy add-on, but its current state really spoils the one big thing behavior wanted survivors to do when facing Krasue. Lastly, we have the Rotten Swine and the Mysterious Elixir, and the reason I am talking about both of them is because they both utilize a similar design, but in a different way. Rotten Swine now allows Regurgitate to mark pallets, generators, and breakable walls, and increases the breaking speeds. Meanwhile, Mysterious Elixir marks windows and blocks them for a short time after vaulting them. Of all the purple add-ons, I must say that I like these two the most, as they place more power into the body form and try something unique with them. I admire the fact that these add-ons promote the idea of infecting objects and planning ahead with Krasue, as these add-ons do not have any timers to their effects. They only get removed when you activate them or mark a new target. As a result, they can be used to shut down potentially fatal loops for Krasue ahead of time, as now you can block a strong window or break a pallet faster when forced into body form. That being said, I believe Mysterious Elixir is the better option of the two, as Rotten Swine's numbers are severely low, especially compared to any other bulldozer type add-on like it, but I can also understand why, considering the killer. Now we have the last two add-ons, these being Shredded Gown and Chicken Head, and it is very clear one is much better than the other. Shredded Gown reveals the auras of survivors nearby or holding glowing fungi when swapping forms for a short time, and Chicken Head causes all survivors to spawn with Leeched 1, but 2 more glowing fungi spawn as compensation. Chicken Head is by far the strongest add-on Krasue owns, as being capable of spawning survivors infected at the start and not needing to waste time in the body form means that your lethality is ready to go. Additionally, although more fungi spawn, which is nice, it really does not help survivors, especially when you can instantly down them before the infection clears. It also pairs quite nicely with Chunka Malai, making the cleansing effects of the glowing fungi take much longer, or Lorenza's Remains to start with the slugging strategy. Additionally, it had the potential to support the hypertunnel lifestyle, as now you have to waste even less time getting survivor on hook infected. But it has luckily been tampered down with the hook cleansing effect in the recent hotfix patch. As for Shredded Gown, unless you are planning 5 steps ahead on where you are placing the glowing fungi, you are not really going to fetch all that much value from the add-on, especially as now Krasue is going to have many more reasons to swap forms, making purposeful placements of the fungi much more challenging. It does not completely remove the value Shredded Gown can fetch, Aura Reading is still Aura Reading, but compared to Chicken Head, which just gives you free lethality, it's going to be a lot harder to utilize it. If I were given the ability to update just a few of Krasue's add-ons, I believe I made it clear which ones need the most attention. First Libretto, Crumpled Music Sheet, Queen's Scepter, and Lorenzo's Remains are all add-ons to promote malicious play, or they are poorly balanced for how good they are. A great example of this is Crumpled Music Sheet. Outside of its base numbers being absolutely cracked, it ends up supporting the tunnel strategy, as it allows you to refresh an infection on a brand new target, and then you have full charges to return back to hook the moment they are saved. Even afterwards, you can refresh your power again now that survivors cleanse from getting hooked, making the add-on even more oppressive to face. Realistically, I can only consider two potential changes for Crumpled Music Sheet. The first being a simple number nerf of reducing the charges gained from 12 down to 4. Realistically, I do see this being a cute add-on that rewards getting infections, but because of its potential to support malicious play, it needs to be toned down, especially for its rarity. If we want to keep some of its strengths, another potential change could be to add 8 charges whenever a survivor is hit by a direct hit of Leeching Gland, while moving the add-on up to purple rarity. This change now allows survivors to deny the value it can provide, as it now only works on fetching direct hits, making dodges even more rewarding on the survivor end. That being said, the reward you do fetch is still a little over half of its current value, which is still very generous. As for which purple it should swap with, I believe Lorenzo's Remains should be knocked down to brown rarity, with a serious rework to how it functions. I propose that it should keep the blindness effect, but it should be like its sister add-ons of Broken Tiara and Defective Metronome, where it only activates upon survivors using the cleansing effects of glowing fungi. The strength of blindness has always been hit or miss, as it can easily be ignored by survivors if its values are too low, while at the same time it can become a real nightmare when it's balanced out of control, like with Cremated Remains on Singularity. That being said, slugging as a strategy is being looked into by Behavior with new systems on the way, but I believe that this would be a solid change to prevent Krasue from following Singularity and being a dumpster of terrible gameplay strategies to torment solo queue. Now comes First Libretto, and it's a very simple change I would recommend. I believe it should be moved into the green rarity, taking Crumpled Music Sheet's place and allowing Lorenzo's Remains to take its place in the brown. It's a very simple shifting of power, similar to when Ghoul got many of his add-ons shuffled when he was updated. First Libretto is a very useful and decently strong add-on, and as a result it feels strange that it is allowed to be in the brown rarity. I believe green would be a much better home for it, but I could see a few number increases if it's not up to par with the other green add-ons later on. Also, as a side note, this is something that I am personally adding into the script later on. I think Framed Newspaper could be bumped with its threshold restriction from 50 to 60%. The value it can provide is very good, but at the same time, since I want to make that 50% penalty base kit, I think the add-on does still need that penalty. But increasing it by a smaller amount to follow would be perfectly fine, at least in my opinion. Now we have Queen's Scepter, and this one is extremely difficult to readjust. Queen's Scepter is an add-on born from a simple idea. What if Krasue had an add-on that reduces the power of body blocking? In theory, it's not a bad concept, as we do have killer add-ons that work with this philosophy, such as Artist's Severed Hands or Twin's Stale Biscuit, where they help reduce the main form of counterplay slightly. The issue Queen's Scepter suffers from is that unlike Twins or Artist, where their add-ons can still be disrupted by smart play or quick reaction times, Krasue does not have any of these weaknesses. The moment a survivor is hit by one drop, they are fully infected, and Krasue can now injure them and punish the player for going for the body block, where this is the one thing that Behavior wanted them to do. Additionally, it can completely impact the survivor who is busy being protected, as the Queen's Scepter can disrupt the cleansing effects of glowing fungi and places them under fire for her head form. Now obviously, map geometry can influence how powerful the add-on can be, but I still think it should give breathing room for survivors to outplay, especially to still maintain the potential for body blocking, just at a weaker rate than usual. There is realistically one idea I could think of, and that is to prevent Leeching Gland from Queen's Scepter from reinfecting cleansing survivors, and to infect survivors 67% to Leeched 1 when hit by Queen's Scepter rather than 100%. This makes it so the add-on is still a viable anti-body block tool, but at the same time it now needs you to hit survivors 2 more times to deal damage. This change also makes it weirdly combined with theater binoculars too, as you now can activate it on hitting a non-infected survivor to locate survivors hit by the Queen's Scepter over time, but it also helps to give survivors a window of opportunity to stay safe. This rework may not be necessary, as I believe Queen's Scepter does need more time to be experimented with, but I believe this change would be great to keep body blocking an option, but at a high risk, compared to now, which makes it an absolute risk. In any case, all the changes I recommended for the add-ons do not need to be exactly copied. After all, these are my own recommendations for add-on rebalancing, and I believe Behavior can get away with some even cooler and even healthier ideas. That being said, I would not mind if Behavior went in the direction that I proposed, especially for the more problematic add-ons like Crumpled Music Sheet and Lorenzo's Remains, as these two desperately need to be looked towards. With that, we have covered everything we needed to about Krasue, and I gotta be honest, her design is pretty neat. Outside of her presentation, which is phenomenal, it is very clear that Krasue has some well thought out elements to promote skill expression and keep her more powerful elements in check. That being said, not every design is perfect, and Krasue definitely had issues that bled through, with her tunnel potential being absurdly strong, and her forms of counterplay being just too difficult to execute in a solo queue space. Behavior have luckily helped to reduce her from being one of the top 3 killers to now being in the top 10, but at the same time, I admired that they were more careful in adjusting her this time around. Her release shows off how adjusting even the smallest thing can skyrocket a character in strength, and the nerfs that we have seen for her target big problems and help reduce their potency. Not everything is resolved, I will admit, but with these recent changes, I at least trust Behavior enough to make the right choices. But now there is one last thing I wish for Krasue, and this is not from Behavior. Instead, it is from you, my dear viewers. It is obviously clear that players are getting tired of Krasue, especially after her release date, and understandably so, but sadly this could end up being a death sentence for her. The Dead by Daylight community loves to work on first impressions. Even to this day, people still think Skull Merchant can 3-gen even after being nerfed to just Woman with Claw. As such, I worry that Krasue players are going to get the same treatment as the other band of misfits who had bad actors, but the rest of their community just gets lumped in with them regardless. I never like seeing anyone get negative comments made about them purely because of who they like to play, as every character Behavior makes has some interesting level of skill expression, whether it be mechanical or intellectual. The only exception is of course Sable and Ghoul players, but that's purely because if their players are going to give me ammo, I may as well use it. That being said, Krasue did get some really good changes to keep her in a more controlled state, and now I wish for you dear viewers to keep an open mind and give her a second chance. Just because Behavior made a mistake on her release does not mean we should be using that as material to go after her mains, or anyone who is busy playing her, as many of these people just want to learn or even experiment new ways to show off just how cool she can be. If you still do not enjoy facing her, I completely understand. People will like what they like. But please try to be civil and provide feedback for Behavior in a nice way, rather than the DBD Twitter direction of the average disconnect abuser. With all of this said and done, I wish you all good luck in your trials, everyone. You will need it, especially if you are a fan of the Rift and you've seen what they've done this time around.